Alright, good evening everybody. Over the last couple of videos I've had a few comments and questions on what Solar Assistant is and how I have it set up. So I thought this would be a good time to show what it is, do a basic overview of the application, how I have it set up, and where you can get it. So let's get started. Alright, so taking a look at how I have Solar Assistant hooked up. So, it runs on this Raspberry Pi right here. And it can run on your local network, or it can put out its own hotspot, so it can be off your own network, so it's not connected to the internet at all. But I have a buck converter hooked up directly to my batteries so that it steps down the voltage from 52, 53 volts down to the 5 volts that the Raspberry Pi needs. And then I've got right now 4 different USB devices. So one comes up to this inverter. It's a USB to RJ45 plugged into the RS232 port on the one inverter. If you look in the back, this blue one right here is a custom cable going into my smart shunt right here. So the data from my smart shunt can go to the Raspberry Pi. And then these other 2 cables actually come over here and they plug directly into my BMSs. And so you have to buy the RS485 adapter for the JK BMS and then get a USB cable that you splice into it. But that allows specific readings to come directly from the BMSs. Now, because I've got multiple batteries and I want it to be very scalable, I just have my Victron shunt acting as my battery monitor. But with these still plugged in, I can quickly switch over and look at any of the details on my BMSs. Now, this RJ45 coming up here to the inverters. So initially, I had the micro USB plugged into each inverter. So I had to have one cable coming from each inverter plugged into the micro USB on the bottom, which then plugged into the Raspberry Pi. But this micro USB port on these inverters is so sketchy. And even Ian from Watts 24/7, he put out a video about how he doesn't even recommend using that port because the more you plug and unplug, plug and unplug, plug and unplug, you're going to end up destroying that port. So that's why I wanted to go with the RJ45 port. And both of the inverters come with an RJ45 to serial cable, but then you have to buy a secondary cable for each inverter going from serial to USB. And so I figured, well, why not just get the cable so that I don't have any conversions? So it's strictly RJ45 to USB. The other nice thing about using this port versus the micro USB is, since these inverters are in split phase, I only need to use one of these cables because a majority of the information comes across the parallel cable for that inverter. So with one connection, I can see the information for both inverters. Otherwise, if I did the micro USBs on each, I'd have to have both cables coming down into the Raspberry Pi. And if you've done anything with the Raspberry Pi, you know one of the biggest shortcomings is there's not enough USB ports. So I would end up needing to get some kind of a powered USB hub, which I would then have to tap into my battery bank, because I don't want to use a 120 volt outlet to then have to have the USB hub step it down. There's just so many losses. So it just makes sense for me to use the one cable to get all the information from the inverters. But I mean, you look at it and it's very simple. I bought the Raspberry Pi completely separate. I got it on eBay. So then all I needed to do was buy the software. But you can buy the Raspberry Pi preloaded with the power supply. So it's all done. You just have to power it up and configure it. And especially now with microprocessors and Raspberry Pis, they're in high demand. They're very hard to find. So I was lucky enough to find this one used, to where I could just get the software for what, $55, and I'd spend it again and again and again, because it is so worth having Solar Assistant versus watch power, or having to come in here and look at my stats every time. So Solar Assistant was very easy to set up, and you can see a lot of information at solar-assistant.io, and I'll include this link in the description to make it easy for you to get there. But they've got videos, and they talk about, you know, what you can do, how you can do it. They actually have additional integrations for applications called Home Assistant. You can make your own integrations using MQTT. I'm not doing any of that stuff right now. All I'm doing is strictly using what's built into what's built into Solar Assistant. And so you can view, you know, here's a big page. Is my inverter supported? And so it'll walk through the different types of inverters that you can use. It'll explain how you need to connect. They've got walkthrough documentation for all the different types of inverters that are supported. You can see on the left, Voltronic, Growatt, Solarc, EG4, and then different batteries that you can connect for your battery monitor, EG4, JKs, JBDs, Seplos, you know, etc. All this stuff you can access from your phone, you can access from a browser, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. Again, as I said before, you can have it set up to where it's not connected to the internet. You might not have internet where you need to run Solar Assistant. You might decide that I don't want this online. So you have the option as to how you want to set it up. So a lot of the frequently asked questions, you know, Solar Assistant is specifically built on the Raspberry Pi. You have to have a Raspberry Pi to make it work. And this page tells you a little bit about it. So if you decide to use your own Raspberry Pi, you know, they've got a support sheet, and then they walk you through everything that you need to do in order to get the Solar Assistant image on the Raspberry Pi, and then configuration. It's really very, very simple. So jumping into my actual Solar Assistant installation, on the dashboard page, you get a quick overview of the current stats of your setup. So right now, 1200 watt load. I've got 1300 coming out of the battery. And the differences here between here and here have to do with the inverter consumption. So the load does not show the inverter consumption, and you can go in and set the inverter consumption. If I was using grid, it would show here, and then same with PV, and you can get an overview of the day. So I had 8 kilowatts of solar coming in. I'm currently at 36% battery, and my inverter is in solar battery mode. And you can see in the last 24 hours, you get a decent snapshot of everything that's gone on. And if you wanted to zoom into the specific area, you can select and highlight and zoom in. And then if you wanted to get specific details about your inverter, so here's my cluster. So I have 2 inverters set up. They're both in solar battery mode. My current load on inverter 1 is 93 watts. Inverter 2 is 1100. It's, almost 9 o'clock at night, so obviously there's no PV. You can see battery voltage down here for each inverter. And grid voltage and frequency for each inverter as well. Now these next 2 tabs, the charts and the totals, are the real areas that I love to see. So I can come to the charts, and they have pre-built all these different charts. And you can select your time frames. If I wanted to look at the last week, I could quickly pull up all the data from the last week. And if I did not want to see the grid power, or if I only wanted to see the grid power, I can just select it, and it's going to show me what I click on. So here's all my PV for the last 7 days. And you can see, boy, this time here, man, there was almost no sun. But then you can kind of see the pattern. Okay, we're starting to get peaks around noon. Same thing there. And you can see the loads. And if you really wanted to get into some of this stuff, you can actually export the data and build your own charts. But we can scroll down, we see battery power, state of charge, and then it breaks down the different MPPTs. You got voltage for 1 and 2, and even the 1 and 2, it breaks it down by inverter. So you can see inverter 1 and inverter 2 details. I mean, it really, watch power doesn't even hold a candle to this. Watch power is a joke. The different MPPTs, you see the battery voltage, temperature, current, and all these are pre-built on the charts tab. AC output, load power, bus voltage. And I can quickly reset. Let's just look at the last hour. And all the charts reset. And again, if I wanted to look at I don't really want to look at the grid frequency, but if I wanted to look at the battery current and get the actual details of the battery current, you can download the data and throw it into Excel, LibreOffice Calc, and manipulate that data, make your own charts. And then this totals tab. So it's going to show you a sum of all your information for the specific days. So today, so far, we've had a load of 10.7 kilowatts. And we had 8 kilowatts of solar. We only put 4.4 in the battery. Discharge 7.3 from the battery, but I haven't used anything from the grid. And it's going to give you that breakdown for the last 30 days. And then you scroll down a little further, and now you get a monthly breakdown. 107 kilowatt load, So far, only 71, because we're starting to get into wintertime. Only 71 for solar. But October, look at this. I love this. 198 kilowatts for the load, but the solar was 256. And the battery charged, discharged, the grid. I love seeing the numbers. And I was not getting that from Watch Power at all. You come into the Power tab. This is where you can dynamically manipulate your inverters. So currently, my inverters are set to solar battery utility. And if I wanted to switch the output priority of the inverters, I can do that right here without even having to go to the inverters for just a set period of time. So if I wanted to run everything off the utility, I could do that for the next 30 minutes, 1 hour. This is where I set the option for my state of charge. When my state of charge drops below 30%, which, if I recall, I might be at 35 right now. So before the night's out, this is actually going to end up switching back over to grid. And then you can have an additional level of protection to shut down your system if your battery gets below a certain percentage. So right now, my inverter is set to Voltronic because that's or MPP, I guess, is the style. Voltronic, I guess, is what it really is, but I'm using that RS-232 cable, and for my battery stats, I'm using the VE direct cable going to my smart shunt. And you know, there's some advanced information. You can set your chart information for this dashboard page. You know, what is your max grid power, solar and PV and everything. I haven't really messed too much with this, but your battery metric is important. And so I want state of charge. I don't want voltage. And here is where you set your idle consumption power. So coming back, like I said, I'm using the smart shunt for my statistics. But if I wanted to use the BMS information, I can disconnect here. And here's all the different types. So you can use the inverter values. You can have an emulated BMS, which is Solar Assistant going through and calculating all the values for you, or DALI, JBD, JK, etc., etc. So if I wanted to switch to the JKs and then select the two battery connections, or select the two BMS connections, and then save and reconnect. Now it's going to be pulling the stats based on the two individual BMSs. And what I forgot to show you earlier, see, this is where it's really off because the individual BMSs think that this battery's at 53% as a whole. I like the battery details that get pulled in from this direct connection to the BMSs, but it just doesn't seem to be nearly as accurate as the smart shunt. You know, I love the fact that I can see the temperatures in here, the individual pack power draws and current, but the state of charge just doesn't seem to match up between the batteries and what the smart shunt does, because the smart shunt calculates everything based on the individual amp hours and what comes in and out of that shunt. And it just doesn't seem like the BMSs have that good of a grasp on how to calculate that. I don't understand why, but at any point in time, I can switch back to the BMS connections and look at the individual pack conditions. But for now, I'm going to switch it back to my Victron connection, go into my smart shunt, hit connect, And if we come back and look at it, so you see my battery here from the smart shunt is at 35%. And the temperature here is coming based off of a temperature probe that's hooked up to one of the bus bars. So it's not really the temperatures of the BMS, it's the temperature of the bus bar in my specific case. But everything is single value, it's not specific pack values. So one last thing that I wanted to show you was down here under the inverter settings. So you have the ability to actually control and manipulate settings on your inverters directly from Solar Assistant. So you can see on this page, we've got specifications, battery settings, input, output settings, miscellaneous, and then some PV settings down here on the bottom. So anything that you can change, you can hit the edit option here, and you can change your output source priority. Your operation logic is new. I'm not quite sure what that one does yet. Over here to battery settings, you can set your battery type, your charge priority, and set your voltage options and your charge options for your batteries. And you can do this per inverter. So not having to sit down right in front of your inverter screens and click through the menus, find the manual, figure out which obscure menu option it is, and then scroll to it, and then try to determine what you're changing the value to because of the sometimes odd options that are on the display. And I get it, you know, they're limited based on what the displays allow for, but this just makes it a whole lot easier to make some of those changes without having to go right down to your inverters themselves. I mean, the big thing for me was just, I'm a numbers guy. I like to see the historical values over time. I like to go back and select and view information from the past to see trends, to see, you know, at what point in time am I noticing that I'm really losing solar? You know, when am I seeing my highest battery usage? All these different things for me really help me fine-tune a system. Seeing solar trends right there. I had 2.32 at 10 o'clock in the morning. But now, as I get closer to winter, you know, my high points are moving around. It's nice being able to see all this information at my fingertips and having it stored. So I came from in my 12-volt system, I had the Victron VRM. So last 6 months, you know, again, this is my 12-volt system. But I loved having all this data at my fingertips. And one of the big factors for me in switching to the EG4 or the MPP or the Grow Watt was I needed some way to be able to get near real-time data and be able to record and save historical data. And I did not like what I was seeing in the pre-built software that came with the units. And I happened across an article in the DIY Solar Forums site that somebody mentioned Solar Assistant. And so I looked it up and I came to their website and I saw this overview video. And I knew this is exactly what I needed. And this would allow me to actually utilize properly the information off of at that point in time, I didn't know if I was going to get the EG4, the MPP, or the Grow Watt, but I didn't have to worry about having to use some junk software that only updated once every 5 to 10 minutes. And that doesn't do you any good. And if I come to the dashboard here, you can see within a couple of seconds, this value is changing. So my loads are changing right in front of me. And I needed something like that. I needed to be able to see that information in real time. And I knew I wasn't getting it with the default software that came with Grow Watt and MPP and EG4. So if you're interested in some real-time monitoring for your inverters, for your environment, for your batteries, and you want it all in one place, a place that's going to record historical information, display it in nice, easy graphs and charts for you to be able to reference that information, hands down, I would look into Solar Assistant. And if you want to buy the hardware preloaded and have it delivered very quickly, I mean, I ordered a cable from Watts 24/7 not a week ago, and it seemed to show up within like 3 days. So I just come to Watts 24/7, search for Solar Assistant, and they've got the different cables that you need, the custom cables, and you can get the full unit from them. And actually, this is the newest unit, Solar Assistant Orange, which actually, from what I understand, the Orange unit allows you to output an HDMI signal from the Raspberry Pi and plug in a display. So in this specific version, they added a web, I don't know if it's a web server or a web browser, but either way, you can plug in any HDMI display into this specific Raspberry Pi. It's got to be an Orange, but you plug in the HDMI output or a TV or monitor or whatever, you plug that in directly into the Raspberry Pi and you can see the Solar Assistant interface and use it right there. So if you wanted to put a display right next to your inverters, you could have a wireless keyboard, wireless mouse, and a little 7-inch display on the wall next to your inverters. You could do that and then have all your stats and specs and historical information at your fingertips right there where all your hardware is. And you can see everything the package includes. And again, you can walk through, see some of the videos, the overviews, all that kind of stuff from here. But I know I bought a cable from these guys and was actually having some problems with it. And I was getting texts and phone calls from Ian trying to work me through, trying to get issues figured out. I mean, it was way after hours. He was still texting back and forth with me over the weekend. You know, all these times where most businesses, as soon as 5 o'clock rolls around, you know, they're done. But Ian really was bending over backwards trying to help me out. So if you're looking for Solar Assistant and you want to get the pre-bundled package, man, pick it up from Watts 24/7. They're gonna really help you out. So I hope this overview of Solar Assistant helps. It really gives me a whole lot more insight into my environment real time than I ever had with anything else. And the beauty of it is I don't have to worry about being right in front of the displays. I don't have to worry about things only updating after 10 minutes. It's live data and it's saved historical data. Really makes the system even more usable for me. So with that, I'm going to wrap it for tonight. Y'all have a good night, and we'll catch up with you later.